Greetings everyone, Baldus here. In this video I'm showcasing a lightning storm build for Druid designed for current PvP content in Diablo 4. After playing a lot of PvP for the past few days, I can say that it feels incredibly strong in 1v1s and has the potential to comfortably 1vx with the right setup. The reason for this is the huge amounts of damage reduction and self-healing we can obtain from aspects, gear, and the Paragon Board, allowing us to tank crazy amounts of burst damage from all classes, especially barbs and rogues, and additionally stacking damage reduction while injured to sustain ourselves through long fights. One of the core aspects that negates a lot of this burst damage is through the use of Debilitating Roar, which we can convert to a werewolf skill and gain 70% damage reduction for a period of time, as well as some other good defensive bonuses. This paired with the healing from the skill tree and spirit boon Masochistic, we can heal very quickly. Now for our damage, while stacking Lucky Hit Chance, we are able to proc multiple lightning effects that can result in a huge amount of burst damage that can 100 to 0 players in a single tick. Overall, this build can tussle with pretty much any player and any class, and is ultimately just very fun to play as well inside the PvP zone. Once the gameplay clips are finished, I'll be back with the gear, skill tree, and Paragon Board. Welcome back everyone. So I'm just going to briefly go over the aspects and the key stat priorities for the gear, and then we'll take a look at the spirit boons, skill tree, and Paragon Board. So to start, we're going to have Tempest Roar for the helmet. This is essential for any storm build that's also using werewolf. For the chest armor, we're going to take the Exploiters aspect. This gives us a massive amount of increased damage against any enemies that are unstoppable. Particularly good against other druids and barbarians. Ideally, you may want another chest armor to have this aspect on, which gives us damage reduction while in werewolf form. Because sometimes you might be in an instance where it's full of rogues that don't have perma unstoppable. So you're not actually benefiting that much from this. Key stats on the armor include any damage reduction you can get, such as close enemies and total armor. Also, damage stats like werewolf skill damage and damage while shapeshifted are quite nice. For the gloves, we want to take Mighty Storms aspect. This makes our Earthen Might also proc off storm skills. Then we want to have Lucky Hit Chance on the gloves and also ranks of Lightning Storm. For the pants, we want to take aspect of disobedience. This is a really nice aspect for defensive layer, as armor provides a really nice source of defense. For the stats, we want to take damage reduction from various sources, such as close, injured, fortified. Maximum life is also good. Just try and get stats that work with the build. For the boots, we want to take the aspect of the Dark Howl. This is a game changer for the build, as it makes debilitating roar now a werewolf skill, so we can use it in Grisly Rage. And it also immobilizes enemies that are poisoned, so it helps to track down those enemies that are running away. The reason why debilitating roar is so good in PvP is because it reduces nearby enemies' damage dealt by 70% for 4 seconds. In PvP, most players like to dump all their damage straight at the start of a fight, so debilitating roar is a really nice skill to avoid that initial burst of damage. We're also gaining fortify and a bit of healing from the skill as well. Key stats on the boots include damage reduction while injured and movement speed. For the weapon, we're going to take the overcharged aspect, and we're going to take this one from the codex as it applies a much greater amount of damage than the one you'd get from normal gear. The reason why this is so good is because when it procs, it deals significant amount of damage to the target. Even though the tooltip says additional damage to surrounding enemies, I actually tested this and it does in fact deal damage to the afflicted target as well. It just doesn't show the damage numbers for some reason. You may have seen from some of the clips that certain players just get one shot from 100 to 0, and the reason for that is because of this aspect. Key stats on the weapon include damage to close enemies, and if you can get damage to 4 skills as well, and I also like all stats. I'd just like to mention that crit damage on gear isn't that good in PvP, as people have done some testing, and crit damage only really scales up to 150% to 200%, and after that there's quite a bit of diminishing returns. Crit damage is still going to add some additional damage, but it just doesn't scale like it would in PvE. For the necklace, we're going to take Direwolf's aspect. This is mainly to reduce our spirit cost when we're casting Lightning Storm, and then we also gain some movement speed. Key stats on the necklace include damage reduction while injured, cooldown reduction, and ranks to envenom. For the ring, we want to take Lightning Dancers. This is a really good aspect, especially when fighting multiple targets or inside of mob packs, because every critical strike spawns 3 dancing bolts that deal quite a nice amount of damage to surrounding targets. Key stats on rings include lucky hit chance and vulnerable damage, and also damage to close targets. For the second ring, we are still going to take Rampaging Werebeast. This increases the duration by 5 seconds. And then we also gain some crit damage stacking, after we gain our crit strikes. Like I just mentioned, the crit damage stacking isn't as significant like it is in PvE, but it's still a good aspect to choose, mainly for the duration. For the totem, we're going to take Runeworker's Conduit. This received a nice buff since the last patch, buffing the damage by 40%. And it just seems to apply a nice amount of passive damage when fighting players. Key stats on the totem include cooldown reduction and lucky hit chance. I just want to mention quickly that if you're fighting a lot of poison rogues in PvP, you may want to have a temerity to switch in, as poison damage doesn't do anything to barriers. So it might be a nice thing to swap in if you're facing a lot of poison rogues. So with the gear done, I just want to talk briefly about the spirit boons. So for the first row, there isn't really much good here, so I just took the maximum spirit. So when we do proc our Earthen Might, we just gain a bit more spirit for our lightning storm. For the second row, I like to take maximum life, as our healing also scales from our maximum life, so it just helps with our survivability. We don't really need any more damage, so the other nodes aren't that useful. For the third row, we take Calamity to extend the duration of Grizzly Rage. And then for the fourth row, we take Massive Chistic for the healing, and Calm Before the Storm to reduce the cooldown of Grizzly Rage. I'd just like to mention cooldown reduction is also quite useful in this build, as we want to have a good uptime on Hurricane and Cyclone armor, and also Debilitating Roar. So I'll quickly go over the skill tree, just very briefly. So we want to take Storm Strike for the damage reduction. Obviously Lightning Storm, some more damage here. Some crit chance against close enemies, and movement speed in Werewolf. Take Cyclone armor, including the additional damage reduction. And then also the passive for damage reduction when using a defensive skill. We've got 2 defensive skills, so we benefit from this quite often. Obviously Debilitating Roar for that damage reduction to nearby enemies. We also gain the Fortify and healing. I also like to pick up 3 points in Nature's Reach for more damage against distant targets when people are running away. In this section, I like to take all this lucky hit stuff so we can gain more vulnerability here. Some additional damage and damage against immobilized. Then we take Hurricane, we gain a bit of slow and melee for this 20% less damage. Then we want to take this poison node in order to unlock our crit strikes deal poison damage. And then Envenom for increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. Like I mentioned before, crit strike damage that's additive doesn't seem to stack as high, but I'm just not sure if the multiplicative aspect of crit damage is affected in the same way. It likely is, but I think this node is still too good to give up. Just for like the start of fights where you still want really high crit damage before your Grizzly Rage starts to ramp up. Over here, we just want to put 1 point into this so we can unlock Circle of Life. When we use a nature magic skill that consumes spirit, we heal for 3% of our maximum life. This is good, especially for Lightning Storm, as every time it ticks, we're gaining that 3% maximum life. Of course, we want to take Grizzly Rage, and then Earthen Might. Now let's move on to the Paragon Board, and if you followed the PvE Lightning Storm build, the Paragon Board is quite different in terms of its setup and pathing. So the first board stays the same, and we just want to have an exploit in here to gain that initial vulnerable when we first engage into an enemy. We also want to take the damage and the maximum life. Now for the first board, we're going to use Heightened Malice, but we're not actually going to take this legendary node, as most of the time when fighting players, we aren't engaging with 3 or more poisoned enemies. So this damage node kind of goes to waste in most scenarios. Potentially, if you're just fighting like groups of PvP or like organized, you know, like 4v4 or something, then this would be good to take. But you would need to free up some points to go and get it. But the main reason for this board is that we're taking damage against poison enemies. And then we're also taking the glyph Earth and Sky here in order to increase the bonus of all magical nodes. The main reason for this is so that we can gain additional damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. And then we also gain damage against poison enemies as well. For me, I also like to use these glyphs that increase magic nodes because it gives us more stats that help to reach our bonuses. These bonuses are on the rare nodes and they have a stat check. The stat check in fact gets harder to reach the further you place the board. And I'll get onto that later, but it's the reasoning why I've chose this layout for the Paragon board. For the second board, we're going to pick up Thunderstruck. Like I mentioned before, this node might not be worth pathing to, as they say crit strike damage has a cap and it doesn't scale as well, but this is multiplicative crit damage, so I'm not sure if it works in the same way. Potentially, if this doesn't add much benefit, we could get rid of this and path into Heightened Malice, which might be more useful. So moving on to the glyph, we're going to take Fang and Claw. Again, this gives us a bonus to all magic nodes. And then we also deal more damage against close enemies while in werewolf form. So again, we're gaining more damage reduction from vulnerable enemies here. And then we're gaining more stats. Some more damage reduction against vulnerable enemies. And then some storm skill damage. Now we move up to the next board and we just take Constricting Tendrils. This board is just mainly used to get a quick glyph slot and move on to the next board. But in here we take Fulminate, which increases our lightning damage and also deals bonus lightning damage against healthy and injured enemies. We also take the node for Nature Magic skill damage and maximum life. Now for this board, this is where it gets a bit interesting, as you wouldn't use this for PvE. But the reason why I've took this board in a beast is because it offers some nice defensive passives. So down here we have lots of armor and maximum life. Another 8% maximum life and 100 armor there. And we get some more armor here. In the glyph slot we take Territorial, which gives us damage to closer enemies and also damage reduction against closer enemies. We also get Shapeshifting skill damage here. And then we move down and quickly take some more damage and a bit of attack speed when we're spam clicking our Lightning Storm. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, the reason why I took this path is so that I can benefit from the stat checks of the rare nodes. As you can see, this requires 530 intelligence in order to gain the double armor. And then same here, this requires 540 dexterity. And like I said before, the further your board is away from the starting point, the higher the stat check will be. So in this case, for our final board, which is Lust for Carnage, the reason I picked it as the last board is that these rare nodes aren't as beneficial as the ones before it. So this would only increase a bit of healing, and this would only increase a bit of werewolf skill damage. So just as a note, this build is refined for a level 100 with maximum Paragon points, so you can take Inner Beast at the end. Sorry, Lust for Carnage at the end. If you're not level 100, you might need to swap Lust for Carnage to this board, and then take Inner Beast before you get to level 100 up here. For the glyph here, we're going to take Werewolf, which just increases our damage in werewolf form, and we also gain damage reduction while in werewolf form. We take all points of willpower here, so we get up to 80% of this stat. And then of course, Lust for Carnage gives us crit strikes. With Werewolf, restore 2 spirit. This is really nice just so we can keep our spirit up for the Lightning Storm spam. So that's pretty much it for the Paragon board. I've been playing a lot of PvP recently and the build feels very strong. I know a lot of people have been having trouble against Hotter Barbs or Hammer of the Ancient Barbs, and in my experience, 90% of them I can deal quite well with this build, just because of the tankiness brought by Debilitating Roar. You kite out their initial damage and then they're quite vulnerable after that fact. I would like to say though that some Hotter Barb builds are just like 10% of people have really just scaled the build really well, so even with this build you might not have a chance against some guys. So that's going to be pretty much it for this video, guys. If you want to use the build, make sure to look at the build planner and check out everything, the stat priorities in full in the notes section. Don't forget also to check me out on Twitch at Baldus Maximus, where I'm streaming 6 out of 7 days a week from 11 AM GMT to around 7:30 GMT. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.